The lights burned hot on the stage that night. The glossy black floors reflecting the shimmer of a studio built for entertainment, but suddenly transformed into an arena. Millions of Americans had tuned in expecting banter, satire, and maybe a gentle roast between two of the most recognizable faces in late-night television. What they got instead was something far rawer, far more unforgettable. Yes, you clicked because Jimmy Kimmel stormed off Stephen Colbert's late-night stage after a heated altercation, live on television. And as shocking as that headline sounds, the reality was even more explosive. It began like any other crossover event. Two kings of late night sharing the same stage. Colbert with his quick-witted, politically charged humor, and Kimmel with his sharp sarcasm and smirking delivery. On paper, it should have been a celebration of comedy. But buried beneath the surface was tension, professional rivalry, ego, and a decade's worth of simmering slights. The setup was innocent enough. Colbert opened with a jab at Washington politics, earning laughter from the studio audience. Kimmel countered with a biting quip about Wall Street greed, leaning into the financial scandals dominating headlines. The audience roared, but then something shifted. What started as witty back and forth began morphing into something more, a duel for dominance. "You know, Stephen," Kimmel said with that trademark smirk, "some of us don't need to lecture America every night to feel important." The audience laughed nervously. The subtext was obvious. Kimmel wasn't just joking about Colbert's political commentary. He was mocking him. Colbert's eyebrows lifted, his smile frozen, but his eyes razor sharp. "And some of us don't need cue cards filled with Kardashian jokes to stay relevant, Jimmy." The room shifted. The crowd gasped, half laughing, half unsure. It was the first real punch of the night. At home, viewers leaned forward. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't harmless banter. It was live television turning into a cage fight, and the stakes were bigger than comedy. This was about influence, reputation, money, and the survival of late night itself. For years, insiders whispered about it. Colbert and Kimmel respected each other, but they were never friends. Ratings battles, network competition, and competing egos had hardened into something like hostility. Both men had carved out empires. Colbert with biting political satire on CBS, Kimmel with mass appeal celebrity roasts on ABC. But now, they were sharing one stage, and it felt less like camaraderie and more like two boxers stepping into the same ring. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew late night was fragile in 2025. Audiences were shrinking. Streaming platforms were eating into their viewership. Advertisers were pouring money into digital-first shows. Every viral moment mattered. And tonight, they were about to get a viral moment that would echo across every platform in America. The conversation turned to politics, a dangerous minefield. Colbert leaned into it, railing against corporate corruption. He painted a picture of how billion-dollar tech companies were tightening their grip on both Washington and entertainment. Kimmel interrupted. "Stephen, you talk about corruption like you're not cashing the same checks the rest of us are. CBS isn't exactly running on charity." The audience gasped. The jab wasn't just sharp. It cut into Colbert's credibility. Colbert froze for a beat. His lips curled into a smile, but his tone was different now. Colder, sharper, edged with steel. "I'd rather cash checks for making people think, Jimmy, than for making them forget." And there it was, the line that turned a spar into a street fight. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others booing. Social media lit up in real time. Within seconds, hashtags started trending. Hashtag Colbert versus Kimmel. Hashtag late night fight. Hashtag Kimmel walks. But we weren't at the walk-off yet. Not even close. What followed was less comedy, more courtroom cross-examination. Kimmel accused Colbert of being smug, hiding behind politics to stay relevant. Colbert accused Kimmel of selling out, chasing easy laughs and corporate endorsements. "You're Hollywood's safe clown," Colbert said. "You punch down, never up." "At least I punch," Kimmel fired back. "You just moralize until people change the channel." The studio audience, usually a guaranteed laugh track, was now divided. Some cheered, others groaned, many sat in stunned silence. The tension was electric. Then came the line that pushed things over the edge. Colbert leaned in, lowered his voice, and delivered it like a prosecutor cornering a witness. "Jimmy, maybe the reason you play it safe is because deep down, you know you're not smart enough to do anything else." The studio went dead silent. For a split second, Kimmel didn't move. His smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. And then he stood up. The scrape of his chair echoed louder than laughter. He adjusted his suit jacket. His microphone still clipped to his lapel, and muttered a line caught only by the hot mic. "I don't need this." The audience gasped. Colbert's eyes widened. The producers froze. And then, in front of millions, Jimmy Kimmel walked off the stage. In television, moments like this don't just vanish. They explode. They ripple outward into headlines, Twitter storms, YouTube breakdowns, and late-night monologues across rival networks. The stakes weren't just personal. They were financial. For advertisers, controversy is currency. For networks, humiliation is leverage. For fans, it was blood sport. And in that moment, one question gripped every viewer. What happens when the kings of comedy turn on each other? Because the walk-off wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The fallout, the interviews, the rival reactions, the media frenzy, would spiral into something no one in late-night television could escape. And as much as Kimmel tried to exit, the truth was, the fight had just started. The image of Jimmy Kimmel leaving the stage hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. But if viewers thought the night's chaos ended there, they were dead wrong. Because what unfolded in the next minutes, and in the hours that followed, transformed a simple walk-off into one of the most dissected media meltdowns in late-night history. As Kimmel's shadow disappeared into wings, the audience erupted into confused chatter. Some laughed nervously, unsure if this was a scripted stunt. Others sat frozen, realizing they'd just witnessed the unraveling of a carefully polished industry illusion. Stephen Colbert sat alone at his desk, his expression flickering between amusement and something sharper, almost satisfaction. He leaned into the camera and with that signature smirk, broke the silence. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what happens when the jokes run out." The audience erupted. Cheers, boos, gasps. Colbert had thrown gasoline on the fire. What looked like a victory lap in the moment would soon ignite a storm of questions. Had Colbert gone too far? Had Kimmel overreacted? Or was the entire spectacle the truest glimpse yet into the ego-fueled empire of late-night TV? Backstage, chaos reigned. Crew members scrambled to Kimmel, who was pacing furiously, microphone still live. Every word was being picked up, broadcast to millions. "You don't get to call me dumb on my own time," Kimmel muttered, unaware his mic was hot. "He thinks he's smarter. He thinks he's better. Screw that." Those words leaked immediately. Twitter lit up. Within minutes, trending hashtags mutated into full-blown digital war zones. Hashtag Team Colbert versus hashtag Team Kimmel. Hashtag walk-off-gate. Hashtag late-night civil war. It was no longer just about two men on a stage. It was about identity, loyalty, and the crumbling facade of late-night unity. Colbert didn't stop. Instead of diffusing the tension, he leaned in, addressing the audience like a courtroom jury. "You just saw it. The man who never stops mocking others couldn't handle one honest critique." He paused. His tone shifted, serious, almost surgical. This is late night in 2025. It's not just about jokes. It's about truth, power, money, and who really calls the shots. If we can't handle being called out, what does that say about the whole business? It wasn't comedy anymore. It was indictment. Producers cut to commercial, desperate to contain the fallout. But the damage was already done. When the show resumed, Colbert tried to slip back into humor. But the audience wasn't laughing the same way anymore. They were part of the trial now, witnesses to a war they hadn't expected. Some clapped louder than ever, eager to side with Colbert. Others crossed their arms, their faces tight with disapproval. One woman in the front row whispered to her friend, audibly enough for the cameras to pick it up, "This isn't funny anymore. This feels ugly." And that was the heart of it. What started as late-night comedy had turned into something resembling political theater, or worse, gladiator combat. By the time the East Coast broadcast ended, news sites were already running headlines. Jimmy Kimmel walks out of Colbert's show after brutal clash. Colbert's insult too far? Late-night egos explode live. Kimmel mic leaks fury. He thinks he's better. Cable news anchors seize on the footage like predators circling wounded prey. Panelists debated it with the same seriousness they reserve for international crises. On CNN, one commentator declared, "This isn't just about two comedians. This is about authenticity. Who's real, who's fake, and who America trusts." Fox News, never missing a chance, aired the clip on repeat, branding Colbert as a bully and Kimmel as a victim of elitist arrogance. Meanwhile, progressive outlets painted Kimmel as thin-skinned, incapable of handling the same fire he throws at others. The battle lines had been drawn, and then came the questions no network wanted asked. If Colbert and Kimmel could openly accuse each other of hypocrisy, what did that say about the machine funding them both? Advertising analysts weighed in. Late night is a billion-dollar ecosystem. Every controversy either bleeds or feeds a beast. Kimmel's ABC show pulled in huge sponsorships from luxury car brands, tech giants, and Wall Street firms, the very institutions Colbert often mocked. Colbert, meanwhile, leaned on politically charged segments that drove viral clips, generating millions in ad revenue for CBS's streaming arm. Their fight wasn't just personal. It was financial. The subtext of every insult was this: who's cashing in and who's selling out? The true shock came the next day. A leaked email surfaced, allegedly from a CBS producer, suggesting that Colbert had planned to provoke Kimmel all along. The subject line read, "Tonight, push him." Inside, outline strategy. Steer the conversation toward politics. Bait Kimmel with corruption talk. Then let the sparks fly. The leak sent the media into a frenzy. Had Colbert engineered the entire spectacle for ratings? Was Kimmel's walk-off the result of manipulation, not spontaneity? Kimmel's team seized on it instantly. A spokesperson blasted CBS. Jimmy came on in good faith. To be ambushed like that, live, is unprofessional and disgraceful. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Colbert wasn't just the witty victor. He was a ruthless tactician. Across social media, Americans were divided. Some praised Colbert for exposing Kimmel's thin skin. Others condemned him for staging humiliation to goose ratings. Many simply reveled in the spectacle, creating memes, gifs, and remixes of Kimmel's walk-off. TikTok loops of Kimmel muttering, "I don't need this," racked up millions of views. Twitter polls asked, "Who won the fight?" and split nearly 50-50ths. Late-night comedy, once a space for laughs, had turned into bloodsport, and the public loved it. The following night, Colbert addressed the controversy head-on. Standing in front of his audience, he tried to frame the narrative. "Last night, we had a difference of opinion. Some people walk off. Some people stay and talk it out. I prefer the latter." He smirked. The audience clapped. But critics saw through it. He wasn't apologizing. He was doubling down. And it worked. Ratings spiked. CBS executives celebrated. But behind the celebration lurked a darker question. How much of late-night television was authentic? And how much was a calculated play for money, influence, and survival? Jimmy Kimmel wasn't done. Within 48 hours, he appeared on his own show, visibly calmer but burning with resolve. When someone calls you dumb on national television, you have two choices: fight or walk. I chose to walk. But make no mistake, I'm not running from anyone. Then came the kicker. I've spent my career making fun of myself. But when someone tries to ambush you with arrogance, that's not comedy. That's cruelty. The audience erupted. Hashtags surged again. Kimmel had just reframed himself, not as a quitter, but as the wrong party. And suddenly, the war wasn't just Colbert versus Kimmel. It was CBS versus ABC, network versus network, empire versus empire. By the end of that week, what began as a fiery late-night clash had metastasized into a full-blown cultural storm. Jimmy Kimmel walking off Stephen Colbert's stage wasn't just entertainment news anymore. It was politics, it was money, it was identity. The confrontation had escaped the studio and was now echoing in living rooms, newsrooms, and even congressional chambers. Mainstream outlets couldn't get enough. Every network ran the clip on loop, dissecting it frame by frame. Analysts slowed down Kimmel's expression before he walked off. replayed Colbert's smirk in slow motion, and asked the kind of questions usually reserved for geopolitical crises. CNN branded it the late-night meltdown. MSNBC framed it as Colbert calls out hypocrisy. Fox News leaned into Kimmel humiliated by liberal elitists. And then came the opinion wars. Columnists sparred in print. Was Colbert right to expose the artificiality of comedy for profit? Or had he crossed a sacred boundary, turning humor into humiliation? It didn't take long for other late-night gladiators to join the fray. Bill Maher, never one to miss an opportunity, addressed it on his HBO stage with a grin. Look, if you can't take a joke, Jimmy, don't sit next to Stephen. The man's sharper than a hedge fund lawyer. The audience roared. But then Maher pivoted, cynical as ever. That said, Colbert planned this. Don't kid yourselves. Late night runs on controversy the way Wall Street runs on greed. And if you think it was spontaneous, I've got a crypto coin to sell you. It was a Maher specialty, cutting both ways, leaving everyone stung. On The View, Sunny Hostin fired back at Maher, defending Kimmel. Bill, you call it controversy. I call it cruelty. We can't normalize humiliation as entertainment. Jimmy was ambushed, plain and simple. Within hours, Maher responded on social media. Sunny, if you think Jimmy Kimmel is fragile, then maybe daytime TV is your speed. The feud had now spread across platforms, HBO, ABC, daytime television, creating a ripple effect that seemed unstoppable. It wasn't long before the political class inserted themselves. Senators, governors, even presidential hopefuls tweeted their takes. One populist firebrand posted, Colbert exposed Hollywood's hypocrisy. Kimmel proved what we already knew. Elites can dish it out, but they can't take it. A progressive Democrat countered. Jimmy showed restraint. Walking away is strength. Colbert turned late night into a weaponized ego trip. Suddenly, the clash wasn't just two comedians. It became a metaphor for America's divisions, who walks away, who fights, and who manipulates for power. Then the financial angle hit. Industry insiders leaked ratings reports. Colbert's confrontation episode had doubled his usual numbers. Advertisers were pouring money into CBS for the next week's slots, while Kimmel's walk-off had spiked his show's YouTube clips to record highs. Late-night television, once fading, was suddenly flush with cash. But at what cost? Media watchdogs accused networks of staging gladiator fights for profit, turning humiliation into a business model. A damning headline from Variety read, When late night turns into Wall Street, humiliation as currency. Colbert's camp denied orchestration. Kimmel's camp leaned into victimhood. The truth? It didn't matter. The money was flowing, and the public couldn't look away. Online, the American audience split into digital tribes. Hashtag Team Colbert fans hailed him as the razor-sharp truth-teller who exposed Kimmel's weakness. Hashtag Team Kimmel supporters framed him as the underdog who walked away from elitist arrogance. Meme culture feasted. Colbert smirks superimposed over gladiator helmets. Kimmel edited walking off into every imaginable situation, from boardrooms to NBA courts. TikTok creators turned the walk-off into viral skits. One creator reenacted it with puppets. Another set the moment to dramatic courtroom music. Every laugh, every remix, every meme pushed the story further, embedding it into the national psyche. On Thursday night, Kimmel escalated. Standing on his own stage, he stared down the camera, no smile this time. Stephen Colbert wants to make me look like a fool. But let's talk facts. His network made millions last night, not from comedy, but from cruelty. If humiliating guests is his new format, then maybe the joke's on all of us. The audience cheered, some even standing. Then came his bombshell. By the way, those emails you've heard about? Yeah, they're real. A CBS producer tried to bait me. And congratulations, it worked. But I won't let anyone profit from my humiliation again. It was a masterstroke. Kimmel had reframed himself as the victim of corporate manipulation, not weak but targeted. His walk-off became a symbol of resistance against rigged spectacle. The next evening, Colbert responded with a monologue that cut like glass. Jimmy says he was set up. Maybe, but isn't that the job? To show up ready for anything? I don't apologize for being sharp. I don't apologize for being honest. If that makes me the villain, fine. At least I'm not boring. The studio audience roared with approval. Colbert leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming. It was no longer about reconciliation. It was about winning. By now, the fallout was bigger than either man. ABC executives met with Kimmel's team to strategize long-term image recovery. CBS doubled down on Colbert, pushing his clips harder on social media than ever before. But in the shadows, another war was brewing. Rival late-night hosts and media figures began whispering. If controversy was currency, how long before every show staged its own walk-off moment? The integrity of late night itself was under siege. What was once about satire, humor, and commentary had devolved into something darker. Humiliation as business, ego as entertainment, money as a referee. As the week closed, one question hovered like smoke. If this was what late night had become, what did it say about America itself? Were viewers complicit for cheering? Were networks corrupt for orchestrating? Were comedians victims, villains, or gladiators trapped in an arena they couldn't escape? And, most importantly, when Kimmel walked off that stage, did he actually lose, or did he spark a rebellion against the very system Colbert seemed to control? Because the storm wasn't over. It was only intensifying, and the final showdown was still ahead. The battle lines were drawn. Networks, pundits, politicians, and the public had all taken sides. But underneath the hashtags and headlines, one truth remained. Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert could not coexist in silence. A final confrontation was inevitable, and it came sooner than anyone expected. 1 week later, CBS stunned America by announcing that Kimmel would return to The Late Show for a special segment. The press release spun it as a gesture of unity and comedy, but insiders whispered about sky-high ratings, advertiser bidding wars, and executives salivating over the spectacle of a rematch. The stage was set again. The audience buzzed with nervous anticipation. Viewers at home braced themselves, fingers hovering over Twitter. When Kimmel walked onto Colbert's stage, the applause was thunderous, laced with tension. Colbert extended his hand. Kimmel hesitated, then shook it. Cameras zoomed in. Every micro-expression mattered. "Jimmy," Colbert began, "welcome back." "Thanks, Stephen," Kimmel said coolly. "I thought I'd give you another chance to insult me." The audience gasped. The fight was back on. Unlike the first clash, there was no slow burn this time. Both men dove straight in. Colbert, leaning on his political edge, accused Kimmel of hypocrisy. "You walk off my stage, then cry victim on yours. That's not strength, Jimmy. That's strategy." Kimmel fired back with venom. "And you, Stephen, ambush me for ratings. You think you're fighting for truth, but you're just selling outrage the same way Wall Street sells junk stocks." The audience erupted, some cheering, some booing. It was chaos. A live jury split down the middle. Then came the twist. Kimmel pulled out a sheet of paper, a printed copy of the leaked CBS email. He held it up for the cameras. "Here it is. Proof your producers set me up. Proof this was never about comedy. This was about humiliation as a business model." The crowd gasped. Colbert's expression hardened, his smirk fading for the first time. Kimmel read aloud. "Push him on politics. Force attention. Don't let him escape. Conflict drives clicks." The words echoed through the studio like a gavel strike in a courtroom. For a moment, it seemed Colbert was cornered. But then, he leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Yes, that email is real. And you know what? I don't regret it. Because this," he gestured around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, "this is the truth of our business. We don't survive on kindness. We survive on conflict. We survive on exposing weakness. And Jimmy, last week, you showed yours." The audience gasped. Some cheered. Others booed loudly. The division was now total. Kimmel didn't back down. Instead, he delivered a line that would define the confrontation. "Maybe so, Stephen. But here's the difference. I walked off. You sold out. And when history remembers this moment, they won't remember who had the sharper joke. They'll remember who had the guts to say no." Silence. Then, thunderous applause. The studio erupted. not in laughter, but in something deeper: vindication. Colbert sat back, his face tight, his smirk gone. For once, the razor would had no reply. The next morning, headlines screamed across every platform. Kimmel outsmarts Colbert with CBS email bombshell. Colbert admits staging conflict. We survive on weakness. Walk-off warrior or master manipulator. The verdict on Kimmel. Polls flooded social media. For the first time since the clash began, public opinion tilted. 62% sided with Kimmel. The narrative had shifted. He wasn't a thin-skinned quitter anymore. He was a whistleblower who exposed the corruption of late-night television. The saga forced a national reckoning. What had late night become? Once, it was about laughter, satire, relief at the end of the day. Now it was blood sport, manufactured humiliation packaged for clicks and cash. The Colbert-Kimmel clash had stripped the industry bare, showing audiences a machinery behind the curtain. Editorials raged. Some condemned both men as egotists, feeding a dying industry with cheap spectacle. Others hailed Kimmel as a rare entertainer who refused to play the rig game. But one question lingered louder than the rest. Was Kimmel's defiance the beginning of a new late night, or the final nail in its coffin? Weeks later, when the noise had begun to fade, Colbert delivered a quiet monologue. No jokes, no smirks, just a single reflection. We fight because we're scared. Scared of irrelevance. Scared of losing the spotlight. Maybe Jimmy was right. Maybe I sold out. But the truth is, so did all of us. The audience sat in silence. No laughter, no cheers. Just the weight of a truth too heavy to ignore. And with that, the curtain fell on the most dramatic late-night confrontation in modern television history. And so, America was left with one lingering question. When comedy becomes combat, who's really laughing? The audience, the networks, or nobody at all?